They told you America began with freedom, but they never told you the price of it. They told you about heroes who signed declarations, but not about the shadows behind the signatures. They said it was a land built on dreams, yet they hid the nightmares that made those dreams possible. And they never told you how close America came to collapsing before it was ever truly born. From the moment the first settlers stepped onto the strange, silent shores of the New World, history began not with liberty, but with survival, a fight against nature, hunger, and humanity itself. Jamestown was not a story of brave explorers, but a desperate colony where famine drove men to madness, and even whispers of cannibalism echoed through its wooden palisades. The Pilgrims at Plymouth did not find a new Eden, they found death, half their people gone within months, and salvation coming not from divine providence, but from a native man named Tisquanum, or Squano, who had once been kidnapped and enslaved by the English themselves. Yet somehow, these fragile settlements endured not through unity, but through relentless conflict, uneasy alliances, and the brutal logic of survival. What they never taught you is that America's foundation wasn't noble. It was chaotic, accidental, and soaked in contradiction. Beneath every tale of freedom lies the echo of someone else's silence. The native tribes who had lived on these lands for thousands of years didn't vanish quietly. They fought, negotiated, and adapted. Long before Washington or Jefferson dreamed of independence, indigenous nations had their own complex democracies, alliances, and trade networks that stretched from the Atlantic to the Great Plains. The Iroquois Confederacy, with its council of chiefs and balance of power, may have even inspired the Founding Fathers' concept of a united government, though they rarely admit it. But where history books glorified settlers, they buried the truth of the people already here, erasing cultures that had once thrived with astronomical knowledge, agriculture, and governance beyond European imagination. When colonists spoke of manifest destiny, they meant expansion, but for millions of Native Americans, it meant disappearance. The land of the free began with the taking of freedom from others. Even the Revolution, the grand myth of liberty, wasn't as pure as the stories make it. While the colonists cried out against tyranny and taxes, nearly 20% of the population lived in chains. Many of the men who fought for independence owned other human beings. And even as they declared all men are created equal, they wrote laws to ensure that equality never extended beyond their own kind. What's rarely taught is how divided the colonies truly were. Not all Americans wanted independence. Thousands of loyalists stayed faithful to the crown, believing rebellion would bring chaos. And they weren't wrong. After the Revolution, America teetered on the edge of anarchy. Soldiers went unpaid, riots broke out, and the government under the Articles of Confederation was so weak that the young nation almost dissolved. The Constitution wasn't born out of idealism. It was born out of desperation, a last attempt to save the dream before it vanished. And that dream, even then, was far from united. The Founding Fathers argued bitterly, fearing both monarchy and democracy. Alexander Hamilton wanted a strong central government and banking system. Thomas Jefferson wanted a nation of farmers and free men. Their conflict would define America's identity for centuries. Liberty versus control, equality versus privilege. But even as the ink dried on the Constitution, one truth remained hidden, that freedom in America would always be selective. While white men debated rights, black slaves tilled the soil that fed the Republic. Native tribes signed treaties that would soon be broken. And women, the unseen backbone of the colonies, had no voice at all. Yet history never lingers on these silenced souls. It crowns its victors and forgets the rest. Behind every name etched in marble was 1,000 more left in the dust. When America expanded westward, it wasn't destiny, it was conquest. The Trail of Tears wasn't a tragic accident. It was government policy. Entire nations, Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, and Seminole, were uprooted, marched for miles in freezing conditions, and left to die along the way. And even as this suffering unfolded, the nation celebrated progress. Railroads were hailed as the veins of civilization, while the ground beneath them was watered with blood. The gold rush brought fortune to few and ruin to many, as greed consumed everything in its path. But there is another truth they never taught you. America's story is also one of resilience, of people who refused to vanish into the margins of history. Enslaved Africans carried with them songs, stories, and faith that would one day ignite the civil rights movement. Immigrants from Ireland, Italy, and China faced hate, poverty, and exploitation, yet they built the railways, factories, and cities that powered the Industrial Revolution. Women like Abigail Adams, Sojourner Truth, and Harriet Tubman didn't wait for permission to shape history. They seized it with courage that defied their age. And while textbooks glorified generals and presidents, the real America was built by hands that history refused to name. The truth is that America's greatness was never guaranteed. It was fought for, often by those who received the least credit. Every inch of progress came with pain, and every freedom gained was wrestled from the grip of resistance. They never told you that the United States nearly broke apart before it became whole. That the Civil War wasn't just about slavery, but about the soul of a nation torn between profit and principle. They don't tell you that even after the Emancipation Proclamation, freedom was an illusion for millions. Reconstruction promised hope, but Jim Crow rebuilt the chains with new names. Schools, homes, and opportunities were segregated, and the dream of equality remained just that, a dream. Yet through all this, America evolved. Not because of its leaders, but because of its people. From native resilience to immigrant endurance, from the songs of the enslaved to the voices of suffragettes, every era brought those once silenced a little closer to being heard. And that perhaps is the real story, the one they never taught you, not of perfection, but of struggle. Not of heroes, but of humanity, because America was never a finished idea. It was, and still is, an experiment, a fragile promise tested in every generation. And if you look closely, the truth isn't in the monuments or the textbooks. It's in the whispers of the forgotten, the cracks in the marble, and the courage of those who refused to be erased. That's the America they never taught you about, the one still being written,